All right. I'm almost away from my cane. And at home I walk around without it. And mostly I'm doing better. So I just kind of had it with me today just in case, because it's useful for a lot of other things too, I found out. If you're on the elevator and you want to press the button, boink, and I'm coming into my house and I want to close the garage door, boink. If I drop something on the floor, I get the cane and I can fish it out. It's got 100 uses, You could probably sharpen a point and roast hot dogs with it. I don't know. But it's good to have it. And I only paid $4.95 for it down at Ollie's. So it wasn't expensive. And I do have a lighter weight one, but I was kind of ashamed to bring it because it has electrical tape on it. My wooden cane. I took it out to Tim's house the other night, and the dog started chewing on it. So he fixed it up with electrical tape. Well, through it all, Christ offers us His divine help through every problem that we face, through every challenge we face in life. And I want to share that thought with you out of 3 passages from 3 chapters in John, chapter 6, chapter 8, and chapter 15. I'm not doing the whole chapters. These are some of the I ams of Jesus. First of all, Christ is able to satisfy your deepest needs, as recorded in John chapter 6, where Jesus and His disciples in John chapter 6 had crossed over the Sea of Galilee, and they were met by a large crowd who had followed ahead of Jesus because they had seen His miracles. Miracles would have a way of attracting people, wouldn't they? You would want to see more. Let's see more of what this teacher can do. And so they were following Jesus, and Jesus went up on a mountainside and began to prepare to teach them. And as the day grew to a close, the people were tired and hungry. And Jesus was aware of that, and so He asked His disciples, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" And Andrew said, "Well, there's a lad here who has 5 small loaves and 2 small fish. But what is that among so many of us?" And Jesus said, "Give them to me." And of course we know the story where Jesus multiplied the bread and fish. And there was a crowd of about 5,000 who were fed that day. Now that lesson really goes beyond the need for food. It goes to a much deeper need, a need for us to believe in and know Christ intimately, because He meets our needs. He said, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst." And Jesus demonstrated that ability on many occasions. And He meets our most pressing needs, even when those needs involve thousands. Now I'm going to tell you a story, and I think I've told this story before, and it's an old story, but I have a reason. Because I want us to focus on what Jesus has done for us in the past. This story begins in Europe after World War II ended. And I may have told this story not long ago, but forgive me if I have. After World War II ended, in a bombed-out city in Germany, there were many people who were homeless, and their homes had been destroyed, and among them were children, homeless children, who were left to fend for themselves. Some of the children found refuge in an orphanage. And in one particular orphanage in that city, it was supervised by nuns. And there the children were welcomed, and they were clothed, and they were fed, and they were treated kindly. And the nuns who cared for them began to observe that the children, though they were in a safe place and had clothing and food, they had difficulty sleeping at night. You remember that story? And so some of the nuns probably proposed remedies like we would do. Well, perhaps the girls could use a doll, and the boys could use a teddy bear to cuddle, and that would encourage them to sleep. So they could have tried that, but it didn't work. The children continued to be restless at night. Others suggested, well, perhaps we could tell them a story and we'll sing a hymn at the end, and that will calm their fears. Well, that didn't work either. That was tried, and the restlessness continued. Finally, one of the nuns gave it further thought, and the more she thought about the problem, she began to think about how they came to them, and they were hungry. And she said, maybe there's a connection between their restlessness and the hunger that they endured. So she said, I'm going to try something else. So that next evening, she gave each of the nuns a slice of bread. And before the lights were out, all the bread was distributed to each child. Each child had a slice of bread. And they fell sound asleep and slept through the entire night, because that slice of bread relieved their anxiety that they had developed, that they would not have anything to eat the next morning. Now, that's an old story, and it has a good lesson. Many of us have walked with the Lord for some time, not just months, but years. How many of you have walked with the Lord for years? Just show your hands. Yeah, see what I mean? You've walked with the Lord. You have a history. Can you remember a time or two in your past when you faced an unexpected difficulty that left you anxious and disturbed, restless? Maybe you lost sleep as well. You felt overwhelmed, and you didn't know what you were going to do next. Maybe it was something to do with a financial need. Maybe it was some health concern. Maybe it concerned your job, where you work, or your family, or your future. And you were, in so many ways, something like those children in the orphanage, or you were even like some of those people, the 5,000 that Jesus fed. They were weary, they were puzzled, they needed comfort. And then God met your need. A word came to you, something from God that took you through that difficulty. Jesus said again, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never hunger. He who believes in me will never thirst. I can think back, and you've heard so many of my stories, but in 1976, when we were living up here in the trailer court, right up here in Mount Chestnut, and I had finished Bible school. I was all ready to go set out into the ministry, and so we left for central Pennsylvania. We left our jobs. I had a job, Linda had a job, and we headed out, and we faced many difficulties during that time. And less than a year after we arrived at the church in Coalport, Pennsylvania, the pastor decided to leave without any warning. He didn't call me into the office and say, look, Brother Miller, I'm going to be leaving. He just left. And we felt like we had been abandoned. And in many ways we had been. But we turned to the Lord, and God found us there, and we trusted Him. And it was as if Jesus had become our bread of life. He met our needs. He satisfied our needs again and again. Whether it was for extra money, whether it was for something, a job to do, or some way to go forward, He met our needs again and again. And this is what we have. This is the kind of God we serve. He is so good to us. He meets our needs every time. The Lord sustained us and watched over us. And then in 1977, after we had been there, we moved on to another church. And that was not problem-free either. There was one man in that church, and I remember him so well. And I'll call his name Ralph. That's not his real name, but Ralph came from a different background, and he had been there at the church. And we started working we were remodeling that church. And suddenly he quit. He quit remodeling it. He quit coming to help. So I didn't know what was going on, so I just pitched in and started doing a lot of the work myself. And it just made him angry. He got angry at me because I was supposedly taking his work, which he wasn't doing. People are funny, aren't they? They want to own something, and then when they own it, they're not happy if anybody else tries to come by and pick up the pieces that were left behind. And I remember Ralph, he just was a character, and I tried to help him. I tried to do good things for him. I went up he said, how about coming up and helping me plant my potatoes? He had a big garden where he lived. So I went out there. I planted row after row of potatoes. I'm not a potato farmer. I just did what he told me to do. And he said, well, in a little while when the potatoes are ripe, you can come up and I'll give you some potatoes. So one day he said, oh, come on up for potatoes. I'm up for potatoes. He gave me a spade. He said, go out and dig them up. I thought, really? Ralph, would you treat Jesus like this? Here, Jesus, take the spade and go dig your potatoes that you planted. Well, that's the way Ralph was. He never did like me after. He never liked me at all. But you're going to run into that, aren't you? The truth is, God just takes you through those things in the past. We found Him faithful. Secondly, Christ is able to faithfully direct our steps today. Let's think about today, right now, when the way forward seems to be difficult and uncertain, somewhat dark. Even today, Jesus is not unable. He is very able. He was confronted by his critics too. The Pharisees. They were experts in the law, and they always were criticizing Jesus because he wasn't from their school. He didn't do this right. He didn't do that right. He didn't wash his hands when he should have, and so forth. So they always criticized them. And then one day in John chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus is speaking, and he says to them, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Now, when Jesus spoke those words to them, he didn't mean them to understand, I once was the light of the world. He said, no, I am now. He wanted the meeting to be now. I am now the light of the world. Whoever follows me now will not walk in darkness, and at this moment will have the light of life. Well, that was just too difficult for them to assimilate, and they turned on him even more. But the message is Jesus wants to meet us now. He wants to be involved now, at the present, in whatever is happening in our lives. And as believers, yes, we live in a world that is filled with spiritual darkness. And the Bible plainly tells us that we face an adversary, an enemy named Satan, and he is the prince of darkness. And he has a host of evil spirits who do his bidding along with him. The God of this world, Paul says, has blinded the minds of the unbelievers so they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. We're not ignorant of his schemes. We're not ignorant of how the enemy tries to enslave us to sin and tries to discourage us and defeat us. And individually, we have to admit we're no match for Satan. He's too clever for us. He's had thousands of years to study the human psyche. He knows just how to approach us. He knows every button to push. He knows just how to irk us. And I have found that he attacks me when I'm trying to print my sermons. It just never fails. I have my sermon, I send it to the printer, something goes haywire in the printer. Happened again this morning. And I'm kind of expecting it anymore because I'm doing Christ's work, and the enemy doesn't want me to bring my sermon printed out and so I can speak to you. And if he wasn't interfering that way, he'd be interfering in another way. So get used to it. We're living in a world of darkness. We have an enemy. He's too clever for us. He knows how to attack us. And his main weapon, by the way, is not just doing dirty tricks. His main weapon is deception. He hides his true intent. He hides who he really is. The New Testament reminds us of that and says, Paul said, and no marvel that Satan is able to transform himself into an angel of light. Have you ever met somebody who was not what you thought they were? Well, the devil can disguise himself so that he appears to be good and considerate and truthful. But in fact, he is none of those things. Long ago in the Garden of Eden, Satan inspired the serpent to speak to Eve and deceive her concerning the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Remember that story? That God had planted in the middle of Eden. God had made it plain. You shall eat of any tree that you want, that you find in Eden, but you shall not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is in the midst of the garden. But the serpent, now we don't understand why serpents could talk or how that was possible, but they did. The serpent is talking to Eve, and he questions God's rule. Yea, hath God said that you will surely die? And he goes on to convince her, no, God is trying to hide from you and withhold from you the value of this tree, the fruit of this tree. It will make you wise and give you understanding, and you'll be advanced, and you'll be just like him if you eat of this fruit. And of course, sadly, Eve was deceived, and she took of the fruit and shared it with Adam, and the result was spiritual death, because God said, the day you eat of that, you'll die. So spiritual death fell on them, and it has fallen on us as well. So there are times now at this moment in our journey when we encounter the power of darkness and deception, because we belong to Christ. And if you haven't encountered any, maybe you're not living close enough. Start praying more. You'll encounter more. And sometimes we forget that. We think we can avoid the slings and arrows of our spiritual enemy, but be certain. I remember an old pastor said to me one time, every soldier that shoots will be shot at. Every one of us, we're shooting for the Lord, we're going to be shot at. You say, well, all is well with me now. But have you been paying attention? Look at what is happening in our country. Look at what is happening. Now at this moment in our nation's history, our historic moral values are being assaulted and thrown out. And they're saying, in effect, that the new normal is lying, cheating, and theft. They're acceptable, while truth and honesty and respect are worthless. Everything is topsy-turvy, isn't it? How can that be? What kind of world would we have if truth was disregarded, if everything was false? That would mean if you drove down to Giant Eagle like I do and to get my prescriptions, and you went through and gave your name and the medication you needed and your date of birth and all that, and they hand you something and you think it's something that the doctor prescribed, but it turns out it's poison. Well, because truth doesn't matter. Or if you go to fill your gas tank up and you think, well, it says high octane, but they're putting sludge in your car because truth doesn't matter. What kind of world would this be? How is it that we are to accept falsehoods and lies and all the things that we're seeing around us? No nation can long endure when it's weighed down by the power and threat of moral darkness. And when people begin to choose moral darkness over moral light, that's a cause for real concern. We need to pray as Christians for our nation before it's too late, because God help us. If this administration that is planning all these things is coming in, this nation is not going to be the same. I sound like a politician, and I don't usually talk about politics, but these are moral issues I'm talking about. Truth, honesty, justice, what's right. And we're hearing so many things that happened right here in Pennsylvania. Where were our leaders? What were they doing? Why did the voting stop halfway through and then shut down at night? And then I just heard a report, a truck driver brought a truckload of ballots, not from someplace in Pennsylvania, but from New York State, and parked it down at the counting center in Philadelphia. And then he was sent home. And he came back the next morning, the van was gone. It was filled with ballots. And there's just too many stories like that. There's hundreds and hundreds of stories, affidavits and so forth. When are we going to listen to the truth? When are we going to hear the truth? We cannot go on like this. And so please pray for our president, pray for our nation. It is so important. Jesus said to his disciples, "You are the light of the world." You and I, as fellow believers, are reflectors of Christ's light in a sinful world. Never forget that. So let your light so shine before men that they see your good works and what? Glorify God who is in heaven. The light of Christ like natural light, is healing, it's liberating, it's rewarding, it pays rich dividends through God's peace and contentment which He gives back to us. Finally, we've found that Christ is able to see us through it all, our past, our present, and so He will continue to see us through our future. Christ is able to make us fruitful for tomorrow. He assures us that as God's own possession, we can prosper and bear much fruit and thereby glorify the Father. He said in John 15:5, I am the vine and you are the branches. If anyone remains in me and I in them, they will bear much fruit. Isn't that wonderful to enjoy fruit? You go to the store and you can get some fruit and it's pretty fresh and you can take it home and enjoy, whether it's grapes or bananas or whatever it is that they offer. You know that it's good and it's fresh and it's healthful. And here in John 15, Christ likens those who are born again to tiny branches of the grapevine, which the Father, the planter, carefully plants and lovingly cares for. The Father has a glorious plan for our futures, and He's a skilled gardener who lovingly and carefully plants us and tends to our spiritual development. In John chapter 15, verse 2, it reads, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, He takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, He prunes it that it may bear more fruit. Now, some years ago, we did a study on this. Bruce Wilkerson, a Christian author, wrote a book called The Secrets of the Vine. And he discusses in that book that phrase which I read. It says that He takes away every branch in me that does not bear fruit. He takes away. And that puzzled him. He thought about this. And the Greek verb there can be translated take away, but it also can be translated lifted up. Every branch in me that He sees that is fallen, He lifts up rather than take away. So Wilkerson wanted to find what was true. So he went to a vineyard. He found a vine grower, a vineyard keeper, and talked with him. And he wanted to settle this matter. And so he asked him about this. When you plant a new planting and you see that it's fallen down, do you take it out? Do you just pull it out and throw it away? And the man said, no. Those vines are too valuable. No, we gently lift the planting back up out of the mud where it's fallen down so that it can begin to grow, because if it's not going to grow, it's not going to bear fruit. And by encouraging it again and lifting it up, he brings the vine into fruitfulness. Now, isn't that what God is doing in our life? Isn't that what God wants to do with us? Sometimes we fall down in the mud. Sometimes we start to grow, and then something happens, we get discouraged, we fall down. Now, does God just come along and say, well, you've had your time, I'm done with you, and yank you out? No, He picks us up. He carefully, gently picks us up. There, little plant, you're going to grow now. And all things being equal, the rain, the sun, and so forth, the nutrients in the soil, it begins to grow. That's the way He is with us. The vineyard keeper doesn't pull it up in disgust and take it away. He lifts it up. And we are that planting that God has made, and He sees us as we can be, as producing fruit and bearing fruit for Him. Because fruitfulness brings glory to Him. Fruitfulness brings glory to the Father. Just as He intended. So God is so much interested in our future. He was faithful in your past. He saw you through. He was faithful. He's faithful now. He will see you through. And He will see you through every difficulty in the future. Every time, past, present, and future, Christ is going to take us through. And what a wonder that will mean for us. And what a wonder and what glory it will bring for Him. So I want to encourage you, whatever place you are in your walk with the Lord, some of you have had a rich history. You can look back and say, oh yes, God met me there, Christ met me there. And you could say, yes, even of late He has met me. At this present time, you can say with assurance, He will surely meet me in the future.